more questions. So I'm just going to take that as like a golden opportunity, although I'm sure we could discuss this all day because it's been really, really insightful, I think. But thank you very, very much, Brendan, and for everyone else who asked questions to participate as well. It's been amazing. Thank you. I'd like now to introduce our next speaker, which is, hang on, we'll just make sure we've got this in the right view first. Webinar, I've been messaging each other. There we go, that's right, but yeah. Beautiful. So our next speaker is Dr. Helen Rook. Helen is recognised as a leader in the field of nursing, empathy and compassion. Her most recent work has examined the psychologization of emotions and the meaning of empathy from cultural perspective. Helen is a registered nurse, a mind coach practitioner, and is the acting D for the Tawahangi Tuati Harua Wellington Facility of Health at Te Haranga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Helen is a member of the Collaborating Centres for Safe Healthcare, Health Services Research Association Australia New Zealand, International Philosophy of Nursing Society, and is a Tawata Ora Wellbeing Champion. Dr. Rook's clinical and research activities have led to an exploration and critical examination of the impact of culture, values, and coping mechanisms on therapeutic relationships, performance, and well-being. Helen is particularly interested in fostering organisational climates to build resilient, mindful, self-confident, and empathetic people. Sounds amazing. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Helen Rook.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Kelly, you did awesome trying to pronounce those beautiful Tereo names.
I was actually going to preface it with, I have been practicing, but I really, really wasn't sure. So thank you for your kindness.
You did amazing.
Thank you, Helen. Yes, and we can hear you. We can hear you beautifully.
Okay, perfect. And can I just confirm to you how much time I have?
You have until 11:30, but
okay,
hopefully there's a bit of space for a bit of discussion after your presentation.
Okay, that's perfect. Kia ora koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Helen Rook tōku ingoa. Ismisha, Helen, I am delighted to join you from Wellington, New Zealand. You can tell from my accent that I am also from Ireland, so I'm from Cork, and really thrilled to be here. And thank you, Brendan, for the invitation to come and join you. It's my first time joining your community, so I'm really excited. And to be honest with you, I wasn't sure what I was going to talk to you about this morning. So I'm going to do a bit of riffing off what Brendan has spoken about, and hopefully, actually, what Brendan spoke about, what else, but we'll speak about will kind of be a platform of possibly the conversation that's to come today and tonight with the Northern Hemisphere colleagues. So I've titled this Cultivating a Compassionate Climate and Culture. Possibly that's maybe what I'll talk about, but maybe not. If we just go on to the next slide, I want to start with just a little bit of, this is probably the only slide that I have that has got references in it. Might be one other maybe, but I want to just start because this is often, and it's really interesting what Brenda was saying, we often start with trying to define things and what it is that we mean by particular things. So when we look at, when I say I want to talk about creating cultures and climates of compassion, they are two different things, right? So the climate that we exist within healthcare generally is about having these kind of shared ideas and perceptions about policies and practices and how we are rewarded for how we engage and we comply with some of those things. And the climate is influenced by the culture. And so my PhD work is positioned in culture, is positioned in values and assumptions and beliefs in organizations, and primarily from nursing perspective. So My PhD explored, what are nurses' values? How do they enact them in clinical practice? What gets in the way? I mean, you could tell me what the outcome of my PhD was done. I actually probably didn't even need to do a PhD on it, because I think we all know that there are people have individual values, we have professional values, and we have organization values. And often they are seen as like posters on the wall. They lack meaning for individuals. People don't relate to them. And then there's a dissonance between how we want to be as practitioners and how we are in organizations. So I'm really interested in how we create environments, holistic environments that foster human connection. And I really don't care what we call it. I don't care if we call it compassion. I don't care if we call it empathy. I don't care if we call it person-centered. What I want is I want people to experience a feeling of being seen as a human being and being cared about as a human being in whatever way that looks like. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is a beautiful sycamore tree. And some of you might recognize this tree. If you watch I think it's a 1991 Robin Hood series, Robin Hood movie. This is from one of the scenes in the movie, but this is in a place called Hadrian's Wall in the UK. The wall itself has been there for well over 1,000 years. The tree itself, this beautiful sycamore tree, was there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, there is some meaning behind why I'm showing you this lovely tree. If we think about an organization and a climate and a culture, we think about all of the things that it takes to nurture something beautiful like this, right? So we have to have the right environment, we have to have the right soil, we have to have the right light. We have to respect it. People come and they enjoy it. So they have a connection to the place, they have a connection to the tree. And so through that connection, they generate experience of interacting with the team. People have gone here and have been proposed to. People have gone here and spread ashes in this site. So it becomes more than a wall, and it becomes more than a tree, and people attach a lot of things to it. If you just click on the next slide, you'll see what happened to this lovely tree. It got cut down, and it got cut down rather, well, some would say maliciously, but by a 16-year-old who cut down the tree. And when I try to figure out, like, well, why would you cut down a tree? This is really representative of what happens in organizations, right? We think we have these beautiful cultures, we have these beautiful things, we have this lovely shared connection, and then we have this somebody comes in and changes everything. And we have to start over again, having no appreciation of the context and the beauty that has preceded it. And so they think they're doing a good thing, or they might be thinking that they have to do this in a particular way. I even have no idea what the motivation is for that person or persons who cut down the tree. But it led to an outpouring of grief and sorrow for a lot of people in that area and a lot of people who had a connection to it. And on the one hand, you'd say, it's just a tree. We can plant another tree. But it has a lot of meaning for other people. And what it has led to a polarization of thought and ideas and conversations about who was right and who was wrong about what happened to this beautiful tree. So I am putting this out there for you to think about it, that we can hold on to something really, really tight and really precious to us, the tree, Hadrian's Wall. And in an instant, it can change. And we have to adapt really quickly to that change. And often as human beings, we react in ways that are, positioned through emotions of fear and anger and, trying to understand it. And that can push us into other ways of behaving. And we see this time and again in our political, social world right now, with these, ways in which we are in the world that are very polarizing. We just go to the next slide. what happens to us when we experience a trauma, like the cutting down of a tree or a massive change within an organization, we as human beings behave in ways that aren't necessarily good for us. And those can be manifested in different ways. Now, the little word box, the word cloud that is there, I pulled that together from a session that I did with midwives yesterday. So these are fourth-year midwives. They're in their final year, preparing for practice. And I asked them to think about, I had a 2-hour workshop with them, and I asked them to tell me what they were feeling. And this is what they were feeling. And so this, again, is not surprising. You walk into any healthcare sector, whether it's in New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, England, and you talk to any group of clinicians who work there, anybody who works, whether they are the cleaning staff or the neurosurgeon, and I guarantee you that they will all say to us that they feel stressed, they feel worried, they feel concerned, they're anxious, they feel burdened, they're tired, they don't have enough time to do the things that they want to do. And so when I met with these group of midwives and they told me about this, my job really for the 2 hours was try to help them to understand what that feeling was within them and how to develop some strategies to help them so that they can continue to go into a clinical environment, that they can continue to be present for the people that they are walking alongside with, and that they don't get burnt out and leave the profession, because that's what ends up, that's what ends up happening. The other thing to say about that is that the strategies that these midwives included, use to manage this anxiety and stressed out feeling that they're having is that they use numbing strategies. And the numbing strategies can manifest in a switching off, but they are things that we engage with as human beings. So there's too much of. So too much eating, too much drinking, too much drugs, too much sex, too much porn, too much shopping, too much Netflix, too much TikTok, too much. And that is, we are doing that, really it's a lack of kind of thinking and about a lack of understanding what's going on for us, that we are doing that in some way to protect ourselves from the crappy environment that we find ourselves in. So we try and detach ourselves from that in some way. The other thing to say about that, if you just go to the next slide, please, is that we have what happens in that kind of the feeling space, right? The feeling of stressed out, but then we have the story that goes alongside it. And busyness is the story that goes alongside it. I am too busy. I am too busy to engage with that. It is a disease of busyness. It is something that we hear time and time again. These 3 papers are quite interesting in how they talk about how busyness in and of itself is really problematic, and it is really problematic for an engagement in what you would call, a person-centered approach, right? It is not helping professions. In this case, a lot of this is about nurses, to move forward empathetically, compassionately, to think about themselves and what they actually need to be present in the workforce. One of the pieces of work that I was involved in relatively recently, is probably during COVID, was trying to develop an intervention study in acute clinical environments. And one of the things that we did was that we had an 8-week intervention that we designed, and we went into an acute environment. We had a control and an intervention. It's probably the first quantitative study that I've been involved in from woe to go. But actually the intervention itself was the thing that brought me a lot of joy, because we went twice a day and we made tea for the people that were looking after others. So no matter who they were, whether they were cleaners, whether they're neurosurgeons, whether they're nurses, physios, whoever was in the ward, twice a day we went and we made them tea. On top of that, we also made sure that there was water there in clinical areas so that people could drink water. On top of that, we would take, the way sometimes you get cakes from families, And we would put that on the trolley. And when we would give people tea, we would say, oh, here's some cake that so-and-so made. And what that did was that they were like, oh, they made that for us. And we'd say, oh, yeah, well, next time you walk past, maybe you can say thank you. So it was a way of building connection with those that were inpatients in that clinical environment. The other thing that we did was that we did 5-minute mindfulness every day with the people in that environment. Now, the first thing that people said to us when we went in on that very first week of the intervention was, I'm sorry, I don't have time. I don't have time for a cup of tea. I don't have time. And so they would spend quite a lot of time telling us that they didn't have time for a cup of tea. And so gently and compassionately, we would point that out to them, that you could have had a cup of tea, actually, in the space of time that you were talking to me about a cup of tea. So the idea of busyness is a story and a narrative that we tell ourselves that in some way tries to, I don't know, justify it for ourselves about why we are the way that we are. But actually, if we don't stop and reflect on it and really think about, well, am I actually too busy to have a cup of tea, or whatever the other thing might be, go to the bathroom, then we are not actually being honest with ourselves about what it is that we are, that we have capacity to do. So the disease of busyness is the problem in this whole idea about creating a culture and a climate. It's probably one of the loveliest pieces of work that I have been involved in, because it's 2 years since we did that intervention, and they still make tea and they still do mindfulness. And I'm not in, like, even though we had aims and objectives of that study about measuring empathy and measuring climate and culture, I don't really care actually about what the numbers show. What I care is that people felt seen and that they felt that they were being cared about, and that gave them greater capacity to care for others, and that has been sustained. Let's go to the next slide. I want to take you on one of the problems that I see now that we have got ourselves into. And this was interesting when I was listening to Brendan about the definitions, about the philosophies, about the theories. And I hate to say it, really, but I've probably got to a stage, maybe it's age, I don't know, but I'm really not interested in debating those things anymore. What I'm interested is about how we can collectively see each other and be in relationship with each other. We are now experiencing a social, political climate that is in opposition. It's either one way or another way. It's either right or it's wrong. It's either good or it's bad. It's always or it's never. And that polarizing discourse creates division within our society and within our communities. And we will never achieve health equity. We will never achieve outcomes for Indigenous populations that are positive if we position ourselves in extremist kind of views of one way or another way. There is a different way in which I think that we can view this. Just go to the next slide. So this is me in Northern Ireland. I'm from the Republic of Ireland. Brendan mentioned that in 1994, he was doing data collection for his PhD. This is a photograph of me in 1994 when I graduated as a registered nurse in Northern Ireland. I was part of a cohort of students that travelled from around Ireland and trained in Northern Ireland. So for many of you, you may or you may not know the political climate that existed in Northern Ireland in the, the 70s, 80s, 90s. But I trained in an environment where there was ultimately a civil war going on. We call it the Troubles. We like to downplay the, what happened there. But fundamentally, the places where I lived, and Oma is there in a picture of where it was bombed in 1998. I lived in Portadown and it was bombed. I lived in nursing homes where there were mortar attacks coming down from one area into another. it was extremely challenging to live and work in an environment like that. But one of the gifts that it has given me has been the capacity to understand the other perspective. So I grew up in an environment where really it was about having a united Ireland. My family all believed in having a united Ireland. I went and I lived in Northern Ireland. I had friends who were Protestants, who were Catholics. I became aware of other perspectives. I understood for the first time in my life the impact of colonization on everybody in that community, both from those that came in and were planted and lived in that area and those that had lived there for generations and generations. So I highlight this to you because I actually fundamentally think that my experience through my education, through my experience of working in Northern Ireland and coming from the country of Ireland, has influenced my thinking about people, connection, culture, community, person-centered, compassion, empathy, dare I say it, love of the other, because I had my eyes opened to the extremist kind of perspectives and how damaging that can be to human beings. And we can carry that with us as a burden throughout, you know,
Helen, you've just put yourself on mute.
I put myself on mute, sorry. There you go. I was obviously getting bored. So the some of the antidote to the extremist kind of ways in which we find ourselves in now, and we don't have to look very far. In Australia, you've had the Voice survey. In New Zealand yesterday, Te Aka Whaiora, which is the Maori Health Authority that was established 18 months ago, has now been disestablished. So that's in our country. And then we have the political, we have the wars that are currently going on. We are at a point in time in our history where we have got to just see each other as people who want to be and to live and to be at peace and to be safe and to be nurtured and to be cared about. So if we go to the next slide. This to me is probably, oh, sorry, there's an arrow to me where I was in that photograph. If you want to go back, there I am, the permed hair, it's fabulous. The next pictures that I'm showing you is some of the antidote to some of the pain and suffering that we see in the world. And Jacinda Ardern, I think, you know, she has many supporters and many critics. But what she did when we had the Christchurch terrorist attacks here in New Zealand was that she allowed herself to be seen not as a political leader of a government or a country, even though she was holding that space, but she allowed herself to be seen as somebody who could be present with their own vulnerability and share the pain of the other. And when we're thinking about creating climates, cultures of compassion and empathy, whatever that might look like, then we have to allow ourselves to be seen in our vulnerability and to be able to embrace the vulnerability of others. That is fundamental, I think, to any attempt to have a person-centered approach to anything. It is about being present wholeheartedly and in vulnerability. Now, Jacinda Ardern, because of what I've mentioned earlier, the extremist kind of views of having one perspective or another perspective, having an academic debate and a critique and feeling that we always have to question everything about people's motivations and intentions, Jacinda's had to leave New Zealand because of the abuse and the way that she was treated as a woman and a leader, because of the polarizing perspectives that people have, anti-vaxxers, about the lockdown in the country. And so you have that on the one hand, and then you have a picture like this on the other hand. And so how do we come to a place of reconciliation in relation to this? let's go to the next slide. I love, I've spent a lot of time, and you can't really see it, but let me see if I can kind of read a little bit of it to you. But I've read a lot recently, the work of Desmond Tutu, the Dalai Lama. I'm interested, they have a beautiful book about joy. I'm supporting a PhD student who's doing a PhD on joy and how we find joy in clinical environments. And I'm really interested in that more so than probably anything else at the moment. But let me just read a little bit of you about what the Dalai Lama had to say. Because we all share an identical need for love, it's impossible to feel that anybody we meet, in whatever circumstance it is a brother or a sister, no matter how new the face or how different the dress and the behavior. There is no significant division between us and other people. It's foolish to dwell on external differences because our basic natures are the same. Ultimately, humanity is one, and the small planet is our only home. If we are to protect this home of ours, each of us needs to experience a vivid sense of universal altruism. It is only this feeling that can remove the self-centered motives that cause people to deceive and misuse one another. If you have a sincere and open heart, you naturally feel self-worth and confident, and there's no need to be fearful of others. I believe that every level of society, familial, tribal, national, and international, the key to a happier and more successful world is the growth of compassion. We do not need to become religious, nor do we need to believe in an ideology. All that is necessary is for each of us to develop our own good human qualities. And I absolutely love that, because I think that if we could just do that, I mean, that just changes the world. Next slide, and probably I've only got one or two more. The picture on the right is that group of midwives that I mentioned earlier. That's them yesterday. I took them on what's called, a sensory walk. We had a 2-hour workshop, and they gave me all of the crap that was going on for them, how bad it all is, how stressed they were, and I was like, okay, let's put it all down. And we went for a walk. And during the walk, I had a few rules. One, you didn't talk, you put your phone in your pocket. And 2, you could either focus on something in nature, a sound, a smell, something to look at. And we took a moment in this garden, which doesn't look great, but actually it's a sensory garden. So it has all jasmine and rosemary and things that they could kind of smell. And we went from there around and then back into the kind of the room. So we walked for about half an hour. And one of the things, the feedback that I got from this group of young and newly registered midwives was that, one, they never take time to actually breathe and to be in connection with nature. 2, that the emotions were really real for them, and many of them cried on the walk because they hadn't been still with themselves in a very long time. 3, that they actually needed some real strategies on how to deal with their own anxiety and stress. So we did that. And 4, they felt at the end of that time where they were allowed to just be, that they felt better, able to be in connection with other people, that they could see that the story of their anxiety, the way in which they talked about it, was really, and I asked them, I was like, okay, so if it was a movie, what would it be called with all of this anxiety? And they would be like, oh, it's the Debbie Downer movie. So I don't know if you know what that means, but it's like kind of just this really kind of sad Eeyore kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, how can we transform it? What's the title of your movie going to be moving forward? And we spent some time thinking about what that would be. But that work requires us to work with people and groups and individuals to work on their own internal kind of narrative and story that they have in their head. And so, when we're trying to change a climate and we're trying to change a culture, we can do it at a strategic level. Brendan says, yeah, let's do some strategy and everything. But great, that's great. But actually, until human beings individually do the work on themselves, that they take time to reflect on themselves, that they actually hold the mirror up to how they are behaving and how they are in the world, we'll never make any changes at a bigger kind of organizational level, because the individuals haven't done the work. And most of the time they're sitting in this position of kind of numbing. The other little picture that I have there is called the Araha passport. And Araha is a Tureo word, which means means so many different things. It means love, compassion, it means connection, it means empathy. And that was the basis of the work that we did for the empathy intervention study. And that passport is now the foundation. I mean, we developed this actually during COVID, so you can understand why it's actually called a passport, because no one could actually travel anywhere. And it's green, so I mean, that might have something to do with the fact that I'm Irish. But the passport is now being used and adapted in lots of other research. So I'm going to finally leave you with this final little Māori proverb, this little whakatoki here. And I'm not sure if we have any time for questions, but the final slide, please, is he ata, te maia, nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What's the most important thing in the world? It's the people, it's the people, it's the people. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if I went over.
Thank you, Helen. Only by a minute. I was worried I'd have to cut you off. So you did well. Unfortunately, no time for questions though. But I'm sure what you said has probably sparked a lot of interest for people. So maybe if anyone